The moment is still burned into my memory like a brand. I can close my eyes and hear it, the crack of her palm against my face, sharp and flat. The way a rifle sounds when it fires in an enclosed space. Not loud exactly, just final. I had just walked through the front door of the house I built in 1987. The same house where I raised my son. The same house where my wife Dorothy breathed her last breath in the bedroom upstairs with the yellow curtains she picked out herself. My boots were still wet from the rain outside. I had not even gotten my coat off. My daughter-in-law was standing in the kitchen doorway with a piece of paper in her hand. Not a document this time, not yet. Just a printout of a bank statement with a red circle drawn around a number. She held it up like it was evidence of something I had done wrong. Like a teacher holding up a failed test. "Where did this money go, Walter?" she said. Her voice was the kind of controlled that takes practice. She was not yelling. She was worse than yelling. She was precise. There was $40,000 in the business account on the first of the month. Now there is 11. You explain that to me. I am 67 years old. I spent 32 of those years running Briggs Hardware, a chain of 4 stores across Middle Tennessee that I built from a single rented storefront on a county road outside Murfreesboro. I have hired men, fired men, signed contracts, negotiated with suppliers, and managed payroll through 2 recessions. I have never once stolen a dime, not from a customer, not from a vendor, and certainly not from my own business. "Renata," I said, keeping my voice level. The quarterly insurance premium came out. The vendor payment for the spring inventory order. The equipment lease on the loading dock in Store 3. I can pull up the line items in about 45 seconds if you would like. She stepped closer. Her eyes were doing something I had learned to recognize over the 6 years she had been married to my son Daniel. They went flat. Not angry. Flat. Like a door slamming shut behind a thought she had already decided. "I am not asking about line items," she said. "I am asking about cash transfers. 2 of them. 15,000 each. To an account that has your name on it." I did not answer right away. Because for a moment, I genuinely did not understand what she was saying. Then I did understand. And the understanding was so cold it stopped my breath. "I do not have a personal account at that bank," I said. "Then, you need to explain why your signature is on the authorization form." Before I could say another word, before I could ask to see the form, or ask who had shown it to her, or ask any of the questions that were stacking up behind my teeth, her hand came up, and she slapped me across the left side of my face hard enough to knock my reading glasses off and send them skittering across the linoleum floor. The room went completely quiet. I heard my granddaughter Sophie's cartoon playing in the living room, that cheerful synthetic music that kids' shows always have. Completely indifferent to what had just happened 10 feet away. My son Daniel was standing at the kitchen island. I had not noticed him when I walked in. He was holding a coffee mug in both hands and staring at a spot on the counter with the focused intensity of a man trying very hard not to be in the room he was in. He did not move. He did not say her name. He did not look at me. I stood there with one hand raised, not to strike back, not to defend myself. Just the automatic gesture of a man trying to understand what space he is in. I looked at my son. He took a sip of his coffee. I bent down slowly, my knees complaining the way they always do now, and I picked up my glasses. I put them back on. I looked at my daughter-in-law. "All right," I said. That was all. Just that one word. I turned and walked down the hallway toward the stairs. "We need to talk about this," she called after me. Her voice had shifted back into something almost reasonable. Like the slap had been a temperature reset, and now she was ready to negotiate. "Daniel and I have been going over the books. We need answers, Walter. The stores cannot sustain this." I kept walking. I went upstairs to the bedroom where I sleep when I visit. The room that used to be Daniel's before he moved out and turned into something I do not entirely recognize anymore. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. The left side of my face was warm and beginning to throb. I touched it once, felt the heat under my fingers, and then folded my hands in my lap and sat still. I am not a man who cries easily. I learned that from my father, who learned it from his. But I will tell you that sitting in that room in the dark, I came close. Not because my face hurt, not even because my son had watched it happen and done nothing. I came close because I understood, in the way that old men sometimes understand things in the gut before the mind catches up, that something had been going on for a long time, and I had been too trusting to see it. I did not sleep that night. I lay on top of the covers with my boots still on, and I thought about the past 18 months, about the conversations with Daniel that had felt slightly off, the way he always deflected when I asked about the quarterly numbers, the new vendors I had never approved, the lease renegotiations I had heard about secondhand. I had handed him the day-to-day operations of Briggs Hardware 2 years ago, when my knees got bad enough that standing on a concrete floor for 8 hours became its own punishment. I had kept my name on the ownership documents. I had kept signing the checks, but I had let him run things. I had trusted him because he was my son. At 4 in the morning I got up, went to my truck, and drove to Cracker Barrel on the highway because it opens early, and I needed coffee, and a table, and the specific comfort of a place that is exactly the same every time you walk into it. I called Frank Delacroix from the parking lot before I went inside. Frank has been my attorney since 1991. He is 72 years old, retires twice a year, and unretires himself within 6 weeks each time because he cannot stand being idle. He picked up on the third ring, which told me he was already awake. "Someone hit you," Frank said. About 30 seconds into the conversation. Not a question, just a statement. The way Frank always talks, like he is reading the summary of a document he has already reviewed. "My daughter-in-law," I said. "But that is the least of it." I heard him exhale slowly. "Come to the office at 8. Bring every financial document you have access to. And Walter, do not say anything else to them tonight." I went inside and drank 3 cups of coffee and 8 scrambled eggs I did not taste. And at 8 sharp, I was sitting across from Frank Delacroix in his office above a dry cleaner's on Church Street in Nashville, which is the same office he has occupied since before I knew him and which smells permanently of his pipe even though he quit smoking 12 years ago. I told him everything. The slap, the bank statement, the accusation, the 2 transfers of $15,000 each to an account with my name on it. Daniel's silence. All of it. Frank did not write anything down. He just listened with his elbows on the desk and his fingertips pressed together, looking at the middle distance the way he does when he is sorting information into categories faster than most people can speak. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You have never opened an account at Second Commerce Bank," he said. "I bank at First Federal. Have for 29 years. So someone opened an account in your name at a different institution. That is what I am telling you." Frank reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a legal pad. "And you gave Daniel full operational authority over the business accounts. When? January of last year. I kept co-signatory rights on anything over $25,000, but not on individual transfers under that threshold." I looked at him. "No, not on those." Frank wrote something down. He looked up at me over his reading glasses. "Walter, I want you to go home to your home, not theirs, and I want you to pull every bank statement you can access online, going back 18 months, every account, every card, print them, and bring them back here this afternoon." He paused. "And I need you to call Tommy Breslin." Tommy Breslin ran a 2-man investigation firm out of a converted garage in Brentwood. He had done some work for Frank over the years, the kind of quiet, careful work that involved a lot of watching and very little talking. He charged more than he was worth on paper and exactly what he was worth in practice. I drove home to my house, not theirs, and I sat at the kitchen table that Dorothy and I bought at an estate sale in 1994, and I pulled up every account I had access to. What I found in the first hour told me enough to understand that the problem was bigger than I had allowed myself to imagine while I was lying awake in Daniel's old room. What I found in the second hour told me something that changed everything. The business had 4 insurance policies, 2 property policies, 1 for inventory loss, 1 umbrella liability. Over the past 14 months, there had been 3 claims filed under the inventory loss policy. A refrigerator unit failure in Store 2, a plumbing incident in Store 3 that damaged a seasonal merchandise section, a break-in at Store 1 in February. Together, those three claims had paid out just over $86,000. I had known about the incidents. I had not known about the claim payments, because Daniel had told me each time that the losses were within the deductible and had been absorbed by the operating budget. I had believed him. Every dollar of those insurance payouts had been transferred out of the business operating account within 72 hours of receipt. All three went to the same receiving account. I called Frank. "The account number," I said, when he picked up. "Give it to me." I read it out. There was a pause. I heard him typing. Then a longer pause. "That is not the account in your name at Second Commerce," he said slowly. "There was, they wanda, they wanda, they wanda, they wanda, they wanda, there was, they wanda, there was, they wanda, they wanda, they wanda." "No," I said. "It is a different one. Walter." His voice had gone very flat. "That account was opened 11 months ago. The registered owner is Renata Briggs." I set the phone down on the table. Not to hang up, just to set it down for a moment. I looked at Dorothy's kitchen, at her yellow curtains over the sink, at the coffee mug she bought at a gift shop in Gatlinburg in 2009, that I still use every morning because throwing it away has never once felt like something I am able to do. I thought about what a woman does with $86,000 that she has moved into a private account her husband does not know about. I thought about what that kind of money is for. I picked the phone back up. "Get Tommy Breslin started," I said. Tommy came back to me in 72 hours. He was a compact man in his late 50s who dressed like a suburban accountant and moved through the world like furniture. Nobody remembered him after he left a room. That was his professional gift. He met me at the same Cracker Barrel. He put a manila envelope on the table between our coffee cups and left his hand resting on top of it for a moment. The way people do when they want you to understand something is heavy before you pick it up. "Your daughter-in-law has been meeting with a man named Carl Waverly 3 times a week for the past 6 months, Tommy said. "Tuesdays and Thursdays. Lunch at a place called Meridian on 5th. Saturdays. A condo in Green Hills that is registered to an LLC. The LLC was incorporated in Delaware 8 months ago. The registered agent is a woman who runs 4 other shell companies out of the same address." He took his hand off the envelope. "There is more inside, but the short version is that Carl Waverly is the regional director of operations for a hardware distribution company called GridSource Supply. GridSource Supply has been submitting bids to acquire independent hardware retail chains in Tennessee and northern Georgia for the past 18 months. I looked at the envelope. "How much of our supplier contract is through GridSource?" Tommy looked at me steadily. "About 60% of your core inventory in stores 1 through 3. I opened the envelope. I looked at the photographs, without expression. Renata and a man I did not know, at a restaurant table, leaning toward each other across spreadsheets and what appeared to be financial projections. Renata and the same man outside a building that I assumed was the condo Tommy had mentioned. Renata signing a document at a table, the man's hand on her arm. There was a printed copy of a text message exchange at the back of the stack. Tommy had gotten it through a method I decided not to ask about. I read it slowly. The man, Carl, had written, "Your father-in-law still has his name on the ownership certificates. That has to change before we can move forward with the acquisition." Renata had replied, "Working on it. He's being difficult. But Daniel will come around. Carl, we need this done before the end of Q2. GridSource board approved the offer. $1.4 million for the chain. But only if title is clean. Renata, I know. I'll handle the old man." I put the papers back in the envelope. I sat there for a long moment watching a family across the restaurant, a grandmother, her daughter, 2 small children eating pancakes and arguing cheerfully about something I could not hear. Normal life continuing its normal business 6 feet away from me while mine was on the table in a manila envelope. "There is one more thing," Tommy said. He was watching me carefully. "I talked to a woman named Dee Summerfield. She is a notary who works out of a strip mall in Antioch. She is the notary on 2 of the 3 documents in your name at Second Commerce Bank. He paused. She told me Renata came to her in September. Told her you had mobility issues and could not come in person. She brought a driver's license, which was apparently a convincing reproduction of yours. Dee notarized the documents. She says she felt something was off but did not push it. Another pause. She is willing to talk. She wants to make it right. I folded my hands on the table. I thought for a moment. Tommy, I said, I need one more thing from you. Name it. My granddaughter, Sophie. She is 8 years old. I need to know if she is safe in that house while I finish this. Tommy looked at me. Define safe. I need to know if that woman has ever harmed her. I need to know how Sophie talks about home when she is at school. Whether there are flags. I looked at him directly. I will pay whatever it costs. Tommy nodded once. Give me 48 hours. I drove home. I called Frank and told him everything Tommy had told me. Frank was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, in the careful tone he uses when he is about to hand you something heavy, Walter, the account fraud is state criminal exposure. The insurance claim diversion is a separate issue that is insurance fraud, which can go federal if the amounts cross certain thresholds, and $86,000 is above those thresholds. And the identity fraud for the bank accounts, the fake license, the unauthorized notarization, that is aggravated identity theft. A pause. I have a friend at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and another one at the U.S. Attorney's Office who handles financial crimes. Call them, I said. But not yet. I need a few more days. What are you planning? I looked out my windshield at the parking lot of a grocery store I had pulled into without deciding to. The kind of absent navigation that happens when your mind is somewhere else entirely. I am going to invite my son and daughter-in-law to dinner, I said, at the house. I am going to tell them I have been thinking about what they said, about stepping back, about letting Daniel take full ownership of the business. I am going to tell them I want to sign the transfer papers in person, as a family. Frank was quiet. And the real guests? Tell your friend at the U.S. Attorney's Office that the food will be on the table at 6:30, I said. And tell him to bring his appetite. I spent the next 2 days doing 3 things. I cooked. I called Tommy for his update on Sophie, and I visited Dorothy's grave in the cemetery outside of Smyrna, which I do maybe 6 times a year, and always feel like I should do more. Tommy's update was the one that nearly broke me, not because it was catastrophic, but because of one specific detail. He had spoken to Sophie's 2nd grade teacher, a woman named Mrs. Calloway, under the pretext of inquiring about tutoring programs. Mrs. Calloway had mentioned, without much prompting, that Sophie had been quieter than usual lately, that she had said once, during a classroom feelings exercise, that she was worried about her grandpa, that she had drawn a picture of our house, my house, the one I built, and labeled it the safe place. An 8-year-old child was drawing pictures of my house and calling it the safe place. I stood in my kitchen after I hung up with Tommy, and I held onto the edge of the counter for a long moment and looked at Dorothy's yellow curtains, and I made the same promise to the empty room that men like me make when the account is finally full. This ends now. I made pot roast, because pot roast takes time, and the act of slow cooking something was the only way I could keep my hands steady and my mind organized. I made Dorothy's biscuit recipe from memory. I made an apple pie because it was Sophie's favorite, and I intended for Sophie to be at that table. I called Daniel on a Thursday afternoon. I kept my voice easy, tired, the voice of an old man who has reconsidered and is ready to stop making things difficult. I have been thinking about what Renata said, I told him. About the business being too much for me at my age. She is probably right. I do not want to fight about this anymore. Daniel, I want to do right by you. Can you bring the family over Sunday for dinner? I will make the pot roast. We can talk through the transfer paperwork. There was a pause on his end. I heard him cover the phone and say something I could not make out. Then his voice came back, careful and warm, in the way voices get when people think they have won something. Yeah, Dad. Yeah, we can do that. 6 o'clock? 6:30, I said. I want to have everything ready. He said that sounded great. He said he was glad I was thinking clearly about this. He said he loved me. I told him I loved him too. Because that part was still true regardless of everything else. And when you are my age, you understand that love and trust are not always the same thing. Sunday afternoon, I set the table in the dining room that I have not used for a formal meal since the Christmas before Dorothy passed. I used the china. I ironed the tablecloth. I put out the silver candlesticks. I set 5 places. When Daniel and Renata arrived, I would tell them Frank was joining us. I would not tell them anything about the 5th place setting until Frank walked in with the company he was bringing. I was in the kitchen checking the roast when I heard a small knock at the back door. I opened it, and Sophie was standing on the step in her coat, with her hair in 2 uneven pigtails that she had done herself, which I could tell because Dorothy always said that little girls who do their own hair have a particular kind of crooked that is too specific to fake. Daddy said to wait in the car, she said. But I wanted to come in, she said. I opened the door wider. She walked in and immediately went to the counter and climbed onto her usual stool the way she had done since she was old enough to climb, the stool she had sat on to lick brownie batter off spoons and watch me roll out pie dough and listen to stories about when her daddy was small. She looked around the kitchen with the serious, evaluating expression she sometimes wore, and then she looked at me. Grandpa, she said, are you okay? I thought about 100 different answers. I settled on the true one. I am going to be, I said. Starting tonight. She nodded, satisfied by that the way children sometimes are satisfied by things that adults would push back on. She pulled off her coat and folded it in her lap. It smells like Christmas in here, she said. Then sit there and tell me about your week, I said, while I finished the gravy. She talked. She talked about a book she was reading, about a dispute with a girl in her class over something that seemed to have been resolved by the exchange of a friendship bracelet, about a dream she had, about a horse. I listened and stirred and let her voice fill up the kitchen the way good sounds are supposed to fill good rooms. At some point, she said, very casually, in the middle of a sentence about something else entirely, Mama's been on the phone a lot. She keeps talking about moving somewhere. My hand did not stop stirring. Does she say where? She said Portland one time. But then another time she said she did not mean Portland. A pause. She sounds mad when she talks on the phone, like when she is trying not to yell. I took the gravy off the heat. Well, I said, let's go sit in the dining room. I want you right beside me tonight. She hopped off the stool and took my hand, and we walked into the dining room together, and I seated her at the table in the chair to my immediate left, and I told her she had the most important job at the dinner, which was to eat everything on her plate and be exactly herself. She accepted this responsibility with great seriousness. Daniel and Renata came in from the front. I heard her heels in the hallway. I heard Daniel's voice asking if Frank was already here. I heard Renata say something low that I could not make out, but her tone was the same tone she had used on the phone in Sophie's description, controlled. Barely. They came into the dining room and stopped when they saw the table. Renata was wearing a blazer over a silk blouse, dressed for a business meeting, because that is what this was to her. She looked at the 5 place settings, and her eyes went to mine with a question in them that she kept her face neutral enough not to ask out loud. Frank is joining us, I said. And one other guest. Please. Sit down. The food is ready. Daniel sat. He looked relieved and tired and slightly drunk in the way he always does on Sunday evenings now. Like the week has been draining something out of him that the weekend does not quite refill. Renata sat across from Sophie and looked at her daughter with an expression that was warm enough on the surface and something entirely different underneath. And I watched Sophie look back at her mother with the careful watchfulness of a child who has learned to read a room. I served the pot roast. I poured the wine. We passed the biscuits. For a few minutes, it was almost a normal meal, the kind of meal I had imagined this table being used for when I built this house, when I put in the dining room with the big windows looking out onto the back lot, and the old oak Dorothy had always loved. Renata was halfway through her second glass of wine when the front doorbell rang. I stood up. That will be Frank, I said, and our other guest. Please excuse me. I walked to the front door and opened it. Frank was standing on the porch in his overcoat, and beside him was a woman in her mid-40s in a dark blazer with a U.S. government identification card on a lanyard around her neck. Behind her were two men I did not know, who had the specific posture of people who are accustomed to standing in doorways. Walter, Frank said. Come in, I said. Dinner is on the table. We walked back to the dining room together. I heard Renata's chair push back before I even came through the doorway, the instinctive animal response of someone who is doing something wrong, recognizing the sound of a consequence approaching. The woman in the blazer stepped into the room ahead of Frank. She looked at Renata. She looked at Daniel. She looked at Sophie, briefly, and with something like apology in her expression. Mr. Briggs, she said, looking at Daniel. Mrs. Briggs. She opened her blazer and showed the badge. I am Special Agent Karen Holt with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. I have a warrant for the arrest of Renata Briggs on charges of bank fraud, wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and insurance fraud in connection with the operations of Briggs Hardware, LLC. She looked at the two men behind her, and they stepped forward. Renata stood up so fast her chair went over backward. It hit the floor and Sophie flinched hard, her small body going rigid, and I put my hand over hers on the table, and I kept it there. This is insane, Renata said, and her voice had lost every layer of control she normally maintained. It was raw underneath, the sound of a specific kind of panic that only arrives when a very well-constructed plan collapses all at once. Walter, what did you do? What did you tell them? She looked at Daniel, and what I saw pass across her face in that moment was not love, and it was not fear for him. It was calculation. And she was deciding how quickly she could pivot, how much she could load onto him, how to make the first version of events, the one that stuck. Daniel was looking at the badge. He was the color of old chalk. What is happening? He said, not quite asking. The sentence, landing flat on the table, like something heavy, dropped from a height. Your wife has been diverting business assets, I said. My voice was even. I had spent 3 days making it even. The insurance claims on the 3 store incidents. The ones she told you were absorbed by the operating budget. That money went into an account in her name that you do not know about. Daniel, $86,000. And she opened 2 additional accounts in my name using a fraudulent identification, and used those accounts to make it appear that I was the one moving money out of the business. Renata pointed at me. He is lying. He is confused. He has been mismanaging the finances for years, and now he is trying to cover it up by... The notary has already given a statement, Frank said, quietly. Her name is D. Summerfield. She identified you by photograph. She described the driver's license you brought. She has cooperated fully. Renata's mouth closed. One of the agents stepped to her side. Mrs. Briggs, please come with us. I want to call my attorney, she said. The performance was all the way gone now. She sounded small and flat, and precisely like what she was. You will have that opportunity, the agent said. She let them take her toward the hallway. She did not look at Sophie. That was the thing I will always remember. In all the time I have spent turning that evening over in my mind, she walked out of the dining room of her own daughter's grandfather's house without once looking at the 8-year-old girl still sitting at the process table, not from guilt, not from shame, simply because Sophie had already stopped being relevant to the calculation. Daniel sat in his chair for a long time after she was gone. He sat there, while Frank sat down across from him and set a folder on the table between them. He sat there, while the sound of the federal vehicles pulling away from the curb filtered in through the front windows. He sat there while Sophie climbed into my lap and stayed there without saying a word, her small weight against my chest, her pigtails under my chin. Finally, Daniel looked at me. His eyes were red, and his face was doing something complicated that I recognized because I had seen it in the mirror the morning after the slap. In the moment, I understood how deep the lie went. Did you know? I asked him. Not angry. I had decided I was done being angry at Daniel. Anger is for enemies. What I felt for my son was something much heavier and much older than anger. Did any part of you know? He was quiet for a long time. I knew the money was tight in ways that did not add up, he said. His voice was barely there. I told myself she was handling it. I told myself she was smarter about finance than me. A long pause. I watched her hit you, Dad. And I just sat there. I know, I said. I'm sorry. His voice broke on the second word. I did not tell him it was fine. It was not fine. I did not tell him I forgave him. Because forgiveness is not a thing you hand over at a dinner table the same night everything falls apart. Forgiveness is a long, slow construction project. And I have spent enough years in construction to know that you do not pour the foundation and move in the same day. You are going to need a lawyer, I said. A good one. And you are going to need a job. Because I will be running Briggs Hardware myself for the foreseeable future. And the only position I am hiring you for is stock associate at $12 an hour, the same starting wage I paid the kid I hired out of high school in 1992. Daniel blinked. Dad, that is the offer, I said. You earn your way back. You show me who you are on the floor of a store. The same way I showed your grandfather who I was. If you do that, we will talk. I looked at him. But you have to choose it, Daniel. I am not going to hand it to you. He nodded. He was crying now. Quietly. The way men cry, when they finally stop, trying not to. Sophie, from my lap, reached her small arm across the table toward her father. We sat that way for a while. The three of us, in the dining room of the house I built, with the food cooling on the china and the candles burning down, and the night coming in through the windows, the way Tennessee nights do in April, warm and dark and smelling of everything, trying to come back to life after a hard winter. I am not a man who believes in speeches. I do not think wisdom sounds better when it is dressed up in language. But sitting there with my granddaughter in my lap and my broken son across the table, I understood something that I have been learning my whole life and keep having to learn again. What you build only matters if you build it honest. The company, the house, the family, all of it, requires the same thing. True materials. No shortcuts. No load-bearing walls made of lies. Briggs Hardware is still standing. All 4 stores. I am back in the mornings now, 5 days a week, talking to vendors and walking the floor and doing the work I was always going to do until I physically cannot anymore. Daniel works store 2 in Murfreesboro. He clocks in at 7. He eats lunch in the break room with the other associates and he does not complain about it, at least not to me. He is learning what weight feels like when you carry it honestly. Sophie comes to my house on Wednesdays after school. She does her homework at Dorothy's kitchen table and eats whatever I make and tells me about her week in exhaustive detail, which is the best part of my Wednesdays by a significant margin. She is 9 now. She drew a picture of my house last month and gave it to me. She drew yellow curtains on the windows. I have it on the refrigerator. Renata took a plea. Her attorney got her to agree to 5 years in federal prison on the wire fraud and identity theft counts, with restitution. She is in Alderson, West Virginia. She has not asked about Sophie. I do not know if that is a mercy or an indictment, and I have stopped trying to decide. The hardest thing I have learned at 67 is that generosity without accountability is not kindness. It is a slow disaster. I gave Daniel an easier life than I had, and in doing so, I gave him less of the thing that made my life worth living, which is the specific dignity of building something with your own hands and knowing it is yours because you made it. I thought I was sparing him difficulty. I was actually taking something from him. He is getting it back now, the hard way, and I think he is going to be all right. If you have ever stood in your own home and felt like a stranger in it, if you have ever watched the people you sacrificed everything for look right through you, if you have ever wondered whether love is enough when trust is already gone, then this story is yours too. Sometimes the greatest thing you can give the people you love is not more. Sometimes it is the truth, handed over at a dinner table, in the presence of the law, on your best china. With the apple pie still warm in the oven. Hit the like button if this story stayed with you. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to let someone fall so they could learn to stand. I want to hear from you. Subscribe to Revenge Accounts so you do not miss what comes next. And wherever you are watching from tonight, I hope your house is holding.